to the seventh and then the final lesson in the first phase or the first session of our training as far as basic programming techniques is concerned. So in this particular lesson, we're going to deal with functions. So let's quickly look at the course outline for this particular lesson. So like I said, we're going to talk of functions. Then we look at built-in or predefined functions. So built-in functions are also termed as predefined functions. Then we look at user-defined functions. Then we look at how we call a function after writing it, how we call it. Then we proceed and look at passing arguments to functions. And from there, finally, we tend to look at difference between parameters and arguments as far as functions are concerned. So basically, that is what we have in this particular lesson. Now, let's look at the lesson objectives. So by the end of the lesson, learners will be able to, one, explain the concept of functions and importance of functions in programming. To explain the difference between built-in or predefined functions and then user-defined functions. And then three, explain the concept of calling a function and then passing argument to functions. And finally, explain the difference between parameters and arguments. So these are the objectives for this particular lesson. Now let's dive right into the content. Now let's come to introductions. A function is a collection of instructions that are grouped together to perform an operation or specific task. So basically, functions perform specific tasks. Yeah, they are a collection of instructions that are grouped together to perform an operation or a specific task. Basically, that is what functions do. Now, functions accept input and process it to produce an output. So in our functions, we give them, we pass in some argument, and this argument becomes input. Very soon we'll see what we term as argument and parameters. We pass in argument, and this argument will be processed in the functions and then give us the output. So basically, that is that. The functions are independent and can be used anywhere in a program. Now, what happens here as far as functions is concerned is when we write our programs, we write them on a single file. You can have one program having a lot of functions in the program. So to make these functions available for other programs, so that you know when writing a different program, there is no need you rewrite those lines of codes within that function. Now what we normally do is we put them in functions and then name them. Very soon we'll see how functions are written. We put them in chunks, like in bits, then we put them in functions. So whenever we need any of those things, we can call it in a different program and then execute it over there. For example, we can write a program to maybe, let's say we want to write a complete program on a, let's say, calculator, right? So in this calculator, we have different functions, right? We have maybe how to find a log of a number, logarithm of a number, how to find maybe how do you call it? The scene, the cause, the time of, those functions on a calculator. They are all written on a single file. Now, these particular functions can be, these particular programs can be put into different functions. So maybe, for example, if you are writing a different program, and in that particular program, which is not actually a calculator, what you need to do is, should in case that maybe you need a particular function, maybe say a function to find a log, maybe a logarithm of a number. So what you need to do in that particular program is just to call this particular function from the previous program you've written. We'll go deep into it, and I think you would understand me better. So what I'm talking about here is you can write a program on a single file, and in this same program you can have different functions. So what you can do with these functions is that in case you are writing a different program and you want any of those functions, you don't have to rewrite it again. You just call the function into the new program you are writing. So when the codes are executing line by line and it gets to that particular function's name, it will jump and go back to where the function has been called from, execute that block of code, and then quickly come back and continue with other operations. We'll see all what I'm talking about. Now, these are examples of functions. This is how functions are written in programming. Now, the first one, we have a function to what? Find the sum of two numbers. First of all, we start writing the function. We predefine it with what? The def, which means define. And then after that, we add a function name. Now, in naming our functions, we follow the same good practices we talk of when naming our variables. So we try to, maybe you can see what I've just done. I've used this camel case where I say add two numbers. So with add, with the first letter of add, I use a capital letter. The two, I use capital in that order. So let's use the same practices we learn in how to name our variables in here. So this is the name of the function, and these are the parameters A and B. So these A and B are representing the numbers the user will input. So the first number replaces the A, and then the second number replaces the B. Then after that, we return the sum of this into this particular name of function name. So basically, that is that. So whenever we call this function, which very soon we'll see how that is done. When we call this function, let's say add two numbers, what we need to do is, these are the parameters. So we need to pass in arguments. We need to, what are the arguments here? The numbers that are replacing A and B, because the function is just to add two numbers, and that is why the arguments are just parameters are two. If the function is to add three numbers, it would have been A, B, C. If the function is to add four numbers, it would have been A, B, C, D in that order. So since it is two numbers, we pass in what? Two parameters. The first parameter represents what? The first number. The second parameter, which is B, represents what? The second number. So after that, return here means what? Calculate this, maybe add the first number and second number, and then return it into this particular function. So that when we call this function, quickly it will jump out of the code in which it is called, come here and do the operation like this, put it back inside this, and then return it over there. Then we get the results. We'll see what I'm talking about. Now, this is a second example of a function. A function to increment a number by some number of times. So, like I said, we predefine it what? Using the def keyword, which means define. Then we give the function a name. Now, when giving a function a name, the name should be what? Familiar to the function. Like I said, the function is to what? Increment a number. So if I come to name this function, I name it, let's say, numbers. Maybe the name of my function is numbers. What am I talking about? So if a user sees what? Increment, he or she knows that the number, the function has to do with what? Something about increasing numbers, or maybe something like that. So in naming our functions, let's take note of this. Now, these are the parameters. The function is what? Is for what? To increment a number by some number of times. So def keyword is predefined. Then the increment, that is the name of the function. Then the parameters, the number, the first number which you want to increase. And what? By here stands for the second number, which that is the number of times you want this particular number to be increased. Let's say here we have 2. And then here we have 1. Let's say the user passing 2 here for the first number, then pass 1 here. So what it means is that we want 2 to be increased by how many times? By 1 time. So if it is 4 and 2, we want 4 to be increased by how many times? By 2 times. So basically that is that. So what is going to happen here is this. It's going to return the number here and then add the by to it. Since we are increasing it by this number, to add this to this and then return it into this increment. So whenever the increment is called, this will be executed and then store the results in this so that we can use it anywhere we want. Now, the third one is a function to find the power of a number. So, like I said, we predefine it by using the def keyword, and then after that, we give the name of the function. You see the name here, raised to the power. I use the underscore to close the white spaces. So basically, that is that. So def raised to the power. This return should be here. It should be indented as you see it here. It's a mistake. The return should be indented so that it means, if it is indented, it means it's inside the function. If this were to be in a text editor like in Python, where we shall be writing our Python programs in, you see that there's going to be an error here, which means it's not a function. It should be indented like this, like this. It should be indented, indentation like this. So the name of the function is what? Raised to the power. So the number here and then the power. So whenever we call this raised to the power, what is going to happen is this. It will prompt the user, these are the parameters. It will prompt the user to what? Enter some numbers. And the numbers that the user will enter are called the arguments. So the number and then the power which you want the number to be raised to. And then from there, this particular function will then raise the number to the power here and then store the results inside this particular name raised to the power. So that whenever you call it anywhere, you can just pass in your argument and then it will take these numbers, quickly come here, execute it, and then store the answer here and then return it to you for your consumption. So basically, that is that. Let's see exactly what I'm talking about. Now, let's look at the difference between parameter and argument. Now, a parameter is the input that you define for your function. Let's go back. These are the inputs we define for our function. This is what we need from the user. So these are the parameters. Now, let's go back. Now, whereas argument is the actual value for a given number. Now, when we call this particular function, the numbers the user will input to represent this becomes what? The argument. So that is what we are talking about. We'll see that very soon. Now, for example, say a function to find the sum of two numbers. Now, you've already seen the function there, so I just have to rewrite it here. So that is what you are seeing. Predefine with what? The def keyword, which means define. In the name of the function, add two numbers. Then we pass in our parameters, that is A and B. A represents the first number, B representing the second number. So return the sum of what? A and B and store it inside. Now, this is how we call a function. We call it by its name. Add two numbers. So the moment you just type add two numbers, if it is in a Python program, the moment you just type you call the name of the function, you'll be prompted to open a bracket and pass in your argument. So the first number here represents the A, and then the 3 represent what? The B. So at the point of you entering this, it becomes what? These are the argument and these are the parameters. So basically, I pray you understand. A parameter is the input that you define for a function. So these are the parameters. Whereas argument is the actual value. The values that are represented by this are 2 and 3, or any number the user will input. So they becomes what? Or they become what? The argument. So basically, that is that. So in other words, when we put in this, it means we are adding 2 and 3. So it will add 2 and 3 here, as we saw here. 2 and A stand for 2, the first number, B stand for the second number. So it will add 2 and 3, and then store the answer in this. Now, to display the result, we store the output in a variable called result, which can be named anyhow. Now, for us to be able to display the results of this, we have to store this, the result that is going to be stored here, into a variable. For now, the result is stored in a function, so we can't print out what is in the function. The only thing we can print out is what is in the result. So we have to store it in a variable called results. But you can choose to name it anything. You can choose to name it output, or maybe whatever. I decide to name it result. And then you just equate it to what? The name of the functions and then the argument. So when you run this, and then from there, if it is in a Python, I'll say print result. Then it will display 7 for me sorry, it should be 5, right? Because we are adding. Sorry, it should be 5. It will then add 2 and 3, and then display the results to you what? 7 for me. So how do we call a function? We'll see that very soon again in a clear manner. So like I said, you call it by its name, add 2 numbers. When you call it, maybe you just open the bracket, then you enter the argument, because we define parameters for it here. So we need argument for the values for this particular parameter. So you can put any numbers at all of your choice. So the first number will be for A, second number will be for B. So it will be added here and return it into this particular function and store it in the name of this function. So to call it, we call it here, and then we pass in the argument. To display the results, we store the result inside this variable here. You can name it anything at all you want, and then after that you say display results. So whenever you run the program, it will add the 2 numbers you have passed inside here as your argument, and then display the results for you. So basically, that is how function works, and these are the differences between parameters and then arguments. I pray you understand. Now, function call. So when a function is called, the program leaves the current section of code and moves to the line of code which begins the function. Now, what is happening here is this: whenever you are writing a program and then you call a function, the moment the function hears its name, it leaves this and go to where the function is located and execute that function and then return the answer for you in your program. Now, so after executing the function code, execution goes back to the line of code where the function call was made. So after going to the function and execute what it has to execute, it will then come back to your code and then continue. And it's any data computed and returned by the function replaces the function in the original line of code where the function call was made. So after it goes there to execute the function and come back, it will then come, and the results you get, or the return value you get, will be replaced by what? The name of the variable used to represent over there. So now let's look at the example. Now, say example, this program is to add 2 numbers, right? It's a very simple program to add 2 numbers. So let's see how the program works. So first we start, we declare A and B, and then sum the A, B, and sum as what? Integers. So after that, right, enter two numbers. So input A, B. So you have to enter A and B. So after you enter the two numbers, you input after you enter the two numbers, you input them. Now we are setting sum is equal to add two numbers. Now what are we doing here? We are calling the function add two numbers, the function we saw there. So when we say set sum is equal to this, add two numbers. Now we open this, and then inside this we pass in these are the parameters. So inside this we pass in what? The argument. That is what? These are the parameters. So we pass in the numbers we want to add in here. So whenever we pass in here, now what happens is this. By the calling of this add two numbers, that is the name of the function. It will jump out of this and come back to where the function is, and then execute all this line of code. It will take the first number, add it to the second number, store it inside this, and then return it here, and finally store it in this sum variable. So from there, it will come and display sum. So it will display the sum of the two numbers here, and then end the program. Let me go over again. The program is for what? To add two numbers. One, we start. Two, we declare A and B, and then the sum, meaning after the adding two, the two numbers, the sum, we want to declare them as integers. Then we write enter two numbers, then we input the two numbers. Now we are setting sum is equal to what? Now we are not going to do addition here by ourselves. We have a function that does that. So we call the function here. The set sum is equal to, then we call the function what? Add two numbers. Then we open and pass in our argument. These are the parameters. I'm sure by now you understood what parameters and arguments are. These are the parameters. This is what we define for our function. So these should be represented by the two numbers the user will input. So the user when the user inputs A, 5, it replaces A. 7, then replaces this. Now the moment the program gets to this line of code, and then it knows that this is a function, it jumps out from here. It will not display anything here. It will jump and come to this function, and then execute it. Say add two numbers. What am I adding? I'm adding the first number, second number, and then I'm returning the sum of them, and then storing it here. So it will store it inside this, and then quickly it will come back again, and then from there it will store itself inside what? The sum variable. And when we say display sum, when we say display something in a variable, we don't need the variable, but rather the value. So when we say display sum, it will display the results of what? The addition of A and B, or the values for A and B, and then it will end the program. So that is how functions are executed and are called. Now we are on function call again. So functions can also be called inside another function, and these allows reusability of codes. Good. So we have already written one function, right? That is what? Adding two numbers. So, and then here we are going to write another function, and the function we are writing here is what? Is for finding average of what? Two numbers. You and I know that to find the average of two numbers, first of all, you have to add the two numbers and divide them by 2, right? Good. So what it means is that in writing this program, we should have written the program to add the two numbers before writing the program to what? Find the average. Are you getting it? But since we already have a function which its specific task is to add two numbers, what we do is to call that function here and then pass in the two numbers. It will just add, and then after that we just divide it by what? 2. So that is what we are doing here. So we don't have the function average, right? So we define a function, we call it average. So we pass in the parameters here, A and B. Now we are storing the results for this particular function. Now we are calling this function add two numbers. And I told you that whatever is stored here cannot be printed. It has to be stored in a variable. So we are storing the results in a variable C, which is equal to add two numbers. So we are calling add two numbers here because we will have to add the two numbers before we divide by 2 to get the average. So we can write a different program to add two numbers. Since we already have the function that is responsible for adding two numbers, we call the function, and that is why add two numbers is here. So inside here is our parameters. So we replace the parameters with what? Our argument. So the two numbers you want to find the average of, you pass them in here. So the moment you pass them in here, it will work on this function. It will jump and go and add the two numbers quickly. Then after that, it will come and return, it will store the results in this C. So let's say you put 5 and 4 here. That is 9, right? It will go and add. It will go to this function, which is add two numbers. It will jump to that particular block of code, the function, execute, and then add these two numbers and store it in this variable, which in turn is stored in this C. So we are returning C. We are returning the results. Let's say 5 and before making it 9, right? So the sum here will be 9, and then that will be stored here, which will intend store inside the C variable. So what we are doing is that we are dividing the C, which means we are dividing the sum here by what? 2. After that, then we return this to what? Average. So this one has also become a different function for what? Finding what? Average. So you can see that we already have a function, which is what? Add 2 numbers. And now that we are writing a different function, which is for finding average of 2 numbers. Like I said, since we have to add the 2 numbers, so we don't have to rewrite a different code for adding 2 numbers again, because we've already written it and we put it in a function. So what we are going to do is to call the function, and that is what we have done. We have just called the function here. We pass in the 2 numbers to add the 2 numbers, store it inside the variable C. Then now when we return the C divided by 2, the result is going to be divided by 2. Because average is after adding, you divide by 2 to give you what? The average, right? Good. So after that, it will divide by 2, and then it stores the results in this average, and then that becomes a function for what? Finding average of 2 numbers as well. So basically, that is that. Now let's look at the types of functions. We have built-in or predefined functions. We have the functions that are called built-in. They are built inside the program. These functions that come with the programming language to help perform a task. That is what the built-in function. They come with a program. Very soon we see examples. They are readily available for use and are mostly stored in the standard library function. Each and every program has a standard library. And in this standard library, if you want to know more about the functions, you go there, you type the name of the function, and then they will explain to you what the function does. So basically, that is that. Now, they say the source code is hidden from the user. The source code in which these predefined functions are written is hidden. Nobody sees them. So that you don't see them because some can be curious and try to change certain things. So they are hidden from us. We can't see them. For example, this is one example of what? A built-in function in Python, which is what? Print. So for example, print into bracket inside these 2 inverted commas is from the Python standard library, and it will print anything inside the quotation mark. So in Python, if you say print, you open your parentheses, then in between the quotation marks, you put in something. If you run the program, it will display whatever is in between this particular quote, and then inside this bracket it will display it for you. So that is what it does. So there is a line of code, series of lines of codes that are responsible for. So that is the name of this function. So it is not just print. The print here is the name of the function that has been called. So what we are going to input here is what? The argument. So when we run the print, the function of this work is to what? To display whatever we input here. So it will just quickly jump and go to where the function is and execute all those blocks and come and display the output for us to see. So basically, that is that. Now we are still talking of the built-in functions. So the following are examples of what? Built-in functions. So we have the square of x. Compute the square root of what? The number x. So if you say square of x, this is what? A parameter. So you represent with what? An argument. So you put in a number here, it will find the square of that number. Length of s is also another function, built-in function. So it finds the length of what? The number. This is a parameter. So you represent a number, and that number becomes what? The argument, and it will find the length of that number or whatever. So to upper. This changes the value of all character in a string, that is s to uppercase. Maybe if you write something in here which is in lower cases, and then you predefine it with what? The name of the function to upper, it will change it to what? From lower to what? Uppercase. To lower also is just the vice versa. So this to lower function, the work of this function is that it changes what you input here. If it's in a capital, it changes it to what? To lower letters. So that is the function. So if the function is called, there is a line of codes that are written for this. So when this one is called here, it will go to where the codes are located and execute and come back and perform its function which it's responsible for. So basically that is that. Now let's look at, we are still on the built-in function again. Say square root, and then may be called anywhere in the program that a constant of type float is allowed. So this is what we find this particular square root into brackets is used to find the square root of a number, right? It can be used anywhere in the program. Let's say you want to find the square root of a number. So after calling this square root and the brackets open, yours is to enter the number here. When you run the program, it will find the square root of a number for you, of the particular number you input for you. We'll see all that in Python. Now, that's all. All of the following are valid calls to square root function. Example like set x is equal to a square root of 10. So since you see that this is the name of the function. Since we can print the square root after it is found or is calculated here, we have to declare a variable, and then after the work here, it will be stored in a variable. Now, when we say display x, it will display the output of what? This particular work here. It will display the output of the square root of 10, and then it will be stored inside this x. So when we run the x, it will display the value for us. The same thing applies here. Set y is equal to square root of 45. So this square root is the name of a function, right? So when we call it, it will go to where the lines of code for this particular function is, and then execute it. And then what it does is that after passing in your argument, it will find the square root of that number and then store it in this variable called y. And when you say display y or print y, it will print out the value stored inside the y. That is the square root of 45. So basically, that is that. Now let's look at types of functions again. Still talking of the user-defined function. Now we come to the user-defined functions. These are created by the programmer to perform a specific task. Like I said, very soon we are going to be writing our own functions. The ones that we write as programmers are called the user-defined functions. The predefined or built-in functions are those that come with a programming language. The ones that the programmer writes are called the user-defined functions. So please take note of that. So basically, that is it. These are created by the programmer, right? So like what you saw, add two numbers, find average. We have written them, so they become what? The user-defined functions. So they are commonly used to break a program into smaller sections with each performing a specific task. So you can see the various functions we've written: finding the average, incrementing a number, adding of two numbers, and all that. We can put them on a single file and then add some programs to it. So whenever we need any of those functions in a different file, we'll just call the name of that particular function. It will run and come back to where the function is, execute the function block, and then store the answer in the function's name, and go back there and then store from the name into the variable you are going to be declaring for that particular function. Then after that, when you run and call the variable, as you saw in the previous slide, it will display the value of what you are calculating or what you are finding for. I say every function must have a statement that causes it to execute function call. The statement that make up the function, and the function definition or declaration. What we are talking about here is just the name of the function. You have to make sure you declare the name of the function, because that is the only way you can call it. If you spell the name in a way and then you go there, you go different way, calling it with a different name, it wouldn't even detect it. It wouldn't identify it, not to talk of it coming to execute its work and then returning the value for you. It wouldn't do that. So let's take note of that. Now let's look at an example of user-defined function. Let's start. Declare answer as float. Set answer is equal to cube. Now with this cube, it's a function written by ourselves. We have written it, right? So what is going to happen here is that this is a parameter. It will find a, when the moment this cube is called, it will run and go to the block of codes where the function of this cube is, and then send this 10 over there and then execute it and quickly come back here and store the results in this what they call a variable called answer. So after finding the cube of a number, the cube will go to where the function cube is and do all that, and quickly come back and store the answer, the variable inside this answer variable. Now we say write answer, or in the Python we say print answer. It will display the value that is going to be what found here after finding the cube of a number that you passed in here. So this is it. So this function is for what? Finding a cube. So this is the name of the function, cube. Then you input your number here. Have you seen it? So after inputting the number, it will come and calculate the number here and then store it here and then return it into the function name cube. So when you pass in your number here, it will come and put the number here, and it will take the number here and then maybe raise it to the power what? 3. That is cube, right? Then store the answer inside this cube and then return it into the function name. So when you call the function, the 10 has already come here and then the 3 has been raised to the power of it, which is the cube, and then it has already been calculated using this function here. So quickly you just do what? It will just calculate it and then store the answer here. From there it will come and store the answer inside here, and then when you say write or print the answer, it will display the output. So to make this simple, let's count these lines of code here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now, to make this simple, let's assume we've already written a function called cube and it's somewhere. So you can see that we could have written this program using this five lines of code. Start, declare as float, and then set answer to cube, because we already have a function called cube somewhere. So we don't need to write all this by ourselves. The moment we call this, it will go there and then execute this particular block. This block should be kept somewhere. It will go there and execute all this. Store, return the value inside this cube, and then store it inside the variable that you set here I have set mine to the answer. Then when you say write, it means print what is inside this variable. Then it will display the results of the cube of a number for you, and then you are good to go. Now let's look at declaration or declaring a function. So every function must be created, declared before it can be used. Before you can use a function or create it, it should be declared. To declare a function, the programmer must understand the main goal of the function. Before you can declare a function, you must understand what the function is going to be used for. The programmer then defines clearly the parameters, values to be passed through the needed, for that function. So before you can write a function, you should know what you are writing. You should know what the function is going to do for you. And then after writing in the parameters, if they are needed, you go ahead and input them. If you don't need any parameters, then you know what you are doing as a programmer. You can skip it and then do the needful. So basically that is that. Now let's look at the overview of the function. Now we have the data type here. That is a def function here. Then the function name, then the parameter list, then the function body. You already saw the example of function. We are just disintegrating it here for more understanding and then clarification. So the function declaration has the following part: data type. So that is a def type, and then return type. After everything, it should return the value and then store it in the name of the variable. So the function may return the value. The type of data for the value must be what? Indicated. So after that, it will return the value and then store it inside the name of the function. The function name uniquely identifies its function. What does the function name do to the function? Since each and every function has its specific task that it performs, it means they should have unique names, so that when you are calling for cubic or function to cube a number, you don't go calling the same function for adding two numbers. They should have their own names, unique names, different names. So that is what we are talking about. Now, what is the parameter list? I've already explained what the parameters are. These are the list we define for our functions, which in turn are going to be replaced by what? Arguments. You know what I'm talking about. So it contains the type, order, and number of parameters for the function and are placed inside the parentheses. So they are optional. Functions may contain no parameter. Now, when we're writing functions, we decide to pass in some parameters. Some functions don't need parameters. It's not always that you input what parameters. We will be seeing some functions that don't need parameters and all that. Now, the body of the function is a set of instructions that perform the function task. The body of the function is where the process is going to be done and then store the result in the name of the function. So where the process is done is termed as what? The body of what? The function. And after that, it's stored value or the results of what? The function inside the name of the function, and then it goes back to wherever it is called for execution and then display the output over there. Now, as an example, function to compare two numbers. This is a very simple function to compare two numbers. The start function compare int number one, number two, int number two. So we are comparing two numbers, right? So if number one is greater than number two, then return number one. It means if number one is greater than number two, then return number one and tell me number one is greater than number two. We are comparing them, right? Else return number two. If that is not the case, then it means number two is greater. So return number two for me and end if, and then end the function and end the program. So this function is used to compare two numbers, right? So this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This 9 lines of code is a function. And what does it do? It is used to what? Compare two numbers. Look at all these lines of code. Now let's proceed and check something here. Now we are writing a program to compare two numbers. So let's see what's going to happen here. So it says start. Declare number one, number two as integers. Right, enter number one, input number one. Right, enter number two, input number two. Result is equal to compare. Now, when we call this compare function, you already saw the function compare here, right? This is it. Now we are calling it here. When we call it, it will request for this particular what? Argument to replace this what? Parameters. When we pass in the two numbers we're going to compare, the function will leave this block and then come here because this is where the function is. It will come and take these two numbers and follow this instruction and return the what? The bigger number or the number that is greater, and then store it in this variable what? Compare. Then after that, it will come and store it inside this variable what? Result. And when I run display results, it will display what? The number that is greater than the other, and then that ends the program. So here we just call the function. We should have added these lines of codes to this one. We could have something like almost 17 lines of code because that is under it is going to be a function. So since we've already written the function, we don't have to rewrite the function here again. It has a name. What we do is just to call the name and then we pass in the argument. So it goes to where the function is and then executes this block and then return the answer for us and store it in this variable. So when we say run or print or display results, then it will display the value and then end the program over there for us. Now, calling a function once again, a function call is a statement that invokes a function and causes the function to execute. The when you call a function, it's a statement that prompts the function that, hey, you have been called for action, so do the needful. Take your parameter, your argument, and do the needful and return the value for us. So that is what we mean by calling the function. The function can only be called if it has been defined. Yes, you can only call a function if you have defined it and it has a unique name. I don't have a name. How then do you call me? Hey, right? Yes. So before you can call something, it should have a name. So you must define it, give it a name. So when a function call is made, the program controls get transferred to the core function. I've already explained this. When you're writing a program and you get to a particular function and you call the function, the program stop there and jump out and go to where the function is located and then execute that block. Say what? The program then execute the body of the function. It will go there and execute what the function has to do, and then return the value inside the name of the function. So after the function terminates, execution resumes control to the point of call. So after that, it will come back to where it has been called, and then store the value inside the name of the function, and then it will intend to store it in a variable you have declared as your result. So when you run your results, it should display the output of what you are calculating, which has been executed by the function. So basically, that is that. So to call a function, use the function name followed by a bracket. Yes, to call a function, use the function name followed by a bracket. And inside the bracket, you pass your argument list. So basically, that is that. So it can happen that maybe your function does not need any argument, so you leave it. You just open the bracket and then you close it and you leave it. So that is that. So the parameter list in the function declaration is replaced by argument list in the function call. You understand this? When we define a parameter list, it means surely we put in some numbers and those numbers become what? Arguments. So that's what we are talking about. See, a function call can also have 0 or more arguments. So what we are talking about here is this: when you call a function, some function can have 0 argument. It means they don't need argument. Since you didn't assign or define the parameters for them, it means they don't need any argument. And some too can have more than 5 arguments. So when you more than 5 parameters, so it means when you come to the argument section, you have to pass in all the 5 arguments to replace the parameters. So the argument list must be what? The same size as the parameter. So if you define what? Parameters to be what? A, B, C, D, E, F. A, B, C, D, E, F. That is 6 parameters. So when passing in the argument must be what? 6 values. Each and everyone should replace them. So the order of which you declare the parameters, the same order you're going to what? Input the argument as well. And then it's going to be executed accordingly without any issue. Functions are very interesting in programming. When we begin writing Python programming, you see the value of what? Functions and then how to use them. Let's proceed. Let's talk of function parameters and arguments. When data is passed between a calling and function, and then when data is passed between a calling function, programming language use argument and parameters to transfer the data. What we are talking about here is that after defining your function, and then you pass in your parameters, and then you call the function, then it prompts you to input the arguments. What the language does is that what? The programming languages use argument and parameters to transfer the data. So what the programming language does is that it takes the parameters and then the argument and transfer the data to where the function has been called. So basically that is that. Now the items list in parentheses in the call statement are known as arguments. What we are talking about here is that we are just repeating the same story here. So what we have in the brackets, which we are going to input to replace our parameters, are termed as what? Argument. Whereas those appearing in the function header are known as what? The parameters. Whereas what we have defined in the bracket at the top, just inside the bracket beside the name of the function, becomes what? The parameters. We talk of this. So by now, you should understand the difference between arguments and parameters. So please, that is what we are talking about here. Argument and parameters. Please, you should have deep understanding of them. But like I said, most programmers can't even differentiate this, and it's not surprising. It's not surprising. Sometimes they look confusing. But if you take your time and read in between the lines very well, you would understand what I'm talking about. So let's proceed. So now we have to try this. This is a very simple task. So write a function to find the average of 3 numbers. After that, write a program and call the above function. Call the above function into your program to calculate the average of 3 numbers. So basically, you have to write a function, right? We talk of how to write a function. We predefine it using the def keyword, then the name of the function. Then we open the bracket, then we define our parameters. So since we need to find the average of three numbers, our parameters are going to be three, A, B, C, or X, Y, Z. Whatever you choose to pass inside as your parameters, you do that. Then after that, you know what the return value has to do. So you go ahead and write that. Then after that, you write a different program as well. So that program should be able to find the average of three numbers. So when writing that program, when you get to where to find the average of three numbers, call the function you have already written inside your program, and then for it to display the output for us to see. So basically, that is that. So we'd like to end here. Like I said, functions are very useful. So you can see that if you want to write a different program right now, since we already have functions for adding two numbers, finding average, incrementing a number, finding a cube of a number. If you're writing a different program and you want to find a cube of a number inside that program, you don't have to rewrite all the functions that are responsible for finding a cube of a number again. You just have to call the name cube inside this program. So when it gets to the cube, it will jump out of this program and go to where the function is and execute that block. Then come back into our program and give us the output. So basically, that is that. So say thank you very much for watching. So this will bring us to the end of the first phase or the first session about training. So we will end on functions, and then when we go deep into Python programming itself, all what we have talked about. So as we are sailing through or moving towards or heading to Python programming, I'll urge each and everyone to try and understand what we have learned here. You should know what variables are. You should know what functions are, what data types are, where we have the boolean, the floats, the integers, the strings, the characters, function declaration, function calling, and all that. Know them before you go into Python. That is why we have decided to start with them. So all this, you can also use this to teach your students in the class. So by now, if you want to teach them what functions are, I think with this guide, you'll be able to deliver without limits. Trust me, you'll be able to deliver without limits. So I say thank you very much for watching. So till our next lesson, which is going to be a hands-on Python programming. So thank you very much for watching, and bye.